Good morning, one and all. I thought I was speaking to just ECI this morning, so it was a bit of a shock to see everyone, but welcome to everyone, and particularly welcome to all those people who've travelled far and wide to be here. My name's Michael, and I, as Michael's pointed out, I work at RPA. My only declaration is that I'm also the clinical director of the trauma mob at ECI. You'll be reassured to know that I consider myself an emergency clinician first and foremost, and a traumatologist closely after that. But thank you to the ECI for the support for this project and for the support for the program and this symposium today. Just want to acknowledge a couple of my colleagues, Kendall Bine, Anya Sacha, who were my RAs, and Catherine from the School of Engineering at the Sydney University, also the George Institute and the University of Sydney. So this work with START all arose from our work with Destiny, which ECI funded in 2015. Do I need to explain that picture at all to anyone? That's Emperor Palpatine in Star Wars, in his line to Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, as he's trying to convince him to turn to the dark side. He said, "It is your destiny." But anyway, you knew this was going to be a geeky talk, right? It's about data. It's about data analytics, and it's very, very Gen X. Anyway. So ECI back in 2015 funded us to look at the entire statewide emergency data set and investigate what the drivers of the increased demand were. And there were almost 12 million lines of data to analyse, and we've done so. I'm not going to sort of present everything here because this is sort of the background work to what I'm about to present. But it's all about just characterising and mapping ED demand and data modelling. And here you can see just a picture of ED demand, and I'm not going to explain the details behind that. But the published studies, or the studies that are about to be published to date in 2015 from this project, there's around 10 papers there. The interesting ones that I think are about to be presented by Gabby, the 100+ study, but you would have seen this recently in the Emergency Medicine Journal, Emergency Medicine Australasia, looking at the changes in demand or mean presentations to ED across all of New South Wales over the past 5 years, from 2010 to 2014. And you can see here what I call the Parramatta Road syndrome, in that the demand is pretty much changing over the peak hour periods. Not much change in demand during the night shift periods. So that was an interesting finding for us. Conceptually, this looks simple, but computationally, from the data set of 10 million patients, it took 30 days for our little laptop computer to run this and generate this picture. So anyway, that's where the funding went into. So the learnings from Destiny were, as you probably expect, it's the older sick and injured older patients that are driving the trend, the increased presentations to emergency departments across New South Wales, and that's consistent with other jurisdictions as well. But it's also, unfortunately, the young mentally ill patients that are also increasing above population increases. So, and those two findings suggest to me that the health system in general isn't meeting the needs of those two groups of patients. For other groups of patients, the increases are as per population, so it's all expected. But these are the two groups that are increasing over and above population increases. Other learnings from Destiny, and sorry, that's not a typo. In terms of the data set itself, we spent almost 6 months trying to sort that out and clean that up. And a lot of the problems were related to two things. The presenting problem field, which many of you know in the past was free text, or included free text. But also the diagnostic codes within EDDC as well were problematic in that half of the codes were SNOMED codes and the other half were ICD codes. And as many of you know, SNOMED's a fairly rubbish tool for classifying diagnoses. Very good for clinical documentation and all that, but for diagnoses and case mix and all that sort of stuff, it's important to get that issue fixed up within this data set, and I think that should be a strategic issue for New South Wales Health. So we spent 6 months cleaning up the data, and we finally got a basic linkage between SNOMED and ICD, a cheap and dirty linkage going. And so we finally got to the stage of last year of starting to analyse the data for prediction modelling. And we call this Project START, which is the Sydney Triage to Admission Risk Tool. And apologies for everyone that's not from Sydney, but that was the most convenient acronym that came to mind. So conceptually, what we're dealing with START is a prediction model to help with patient flow within ED, using the data within the Destiny dataset to drive that. So conceptually, what you see here is patient flow as we'd understand it at the moment. So a patient presents, they're triaged, they're streamed, they're assessed by somebody, often junior, then who orders some tests, and you have to wait for the tests, and then they're reviewed by a senior, then you call up the team accepts the patient, and then you decide on a disposition thereabouts. And that process takes about 2 to 3 hours on a good day, where I work anyway. So what we're trying to do is not try to circumvent that process, but actually try and get the decision to disposition a lot earlier in the patient journey. Basically, it's just using the data analytics that are obtained through triage and the initial information that's obtained in the EMR. So this was our initial derivation and internal validation study that was published this year, late last year, anyway. And so we looked at 1.5 million patient presentations from level 5 and 6 emergency departments, adult presentations. And again, apologies for those of you who don't work in level 5 or 6, but it was just easier to look at admission processes from a defined group of hospitals. And I know that level 3s and 4s are probably got slightly different admission processes. So that was the rationale for just using level 5 and 6s for this. But it could be easily done and repeated for different levels of emergency departments. So we analysed the data, we ran it through logistic regression and came up with a couple of risk factors for inpatient admission versus discharge, and they fairly understandably came up with age, ambulance presentation triage category, a previous inpatient admission within 30 days, and presenting problem. And the overall model had an AUC, an area under a curve of the ROC curve of 0.81. And just to, put that in perspective, that's a measure of the accuracy of the model. John was talking about the Grace and TIMI scores. They're approximately the same sort of accuracy as the Grace, Hart and TIMI scores that John described earlier. So we did a prospective validation study using patients at RPA and Canterbury Hospital and followed them through discharge, about 900 patients. And the accuracy measure was virtually identical. And when we looked at the actual length of stay as an outcome as well, so a short stay being less than 2 days, or no, less than 3 days, or discharge from hospital, discharge from ED, or length of stay less than 2 days, the accuracy actually improved. So that's the calibration table. So with all risk scores, you need to, as with TIMI or Grace and with START in front of you, you look at the ranges of risk scores to work out what the sort of accuracies are at different risk score ranges. So if a patient is classified as very likely discharged by the START score, you can see here that 96% of those patients were correctly classified by the START score. when you get down to the very likely admission, there's not a whole lot of those patients, but you can tell sort of intuitively that they're going to be the elderly patients that come in with their Cat 2-3 problems. So we've put in a translational research grant application to trial this as a translation study across a number of sites within Sydney Local Health District. And so the process will be that the start score is calculated manually at triage, and it takes about 15 seconds to do that, and communicated to senior ED clinicians on the shop floor to expedite decision making and get the bed managers to allocate the bed while the patient's still being assessed in ED. So it's been supported kindly by ECI, ACI and the George Institute and Sydney Local Health District, and hopefully we'll find out soon what the outcome of that grant application is. But regardless of whether we get the grant or not, we're pushing ahead. We've still got a little bit of funding from ECI because we finished the Destiny study ahead of schedule. And we're going to, we've engaged with the School of IT at Sydney University, who have access to the Artemis supercomputer at Charles Perkins Centre. And so they've been running the artificial intelligence network algorithm, through the data to get a performance of the prediction, and the performance reassuringly is the same as the logistic regression modelling that we did earlier. And so that we've got now, they've come up with a very simple interface called the Start 2.0 admission predictor, and the predictive variables are there. They're just simply punched in, and it's different from, I guess, a traditional decision support calculator where there's fixed coefficients and risk scores which are computationally added. Behind this interface that you see here is the 1.7 million lines of data that the algorithm's running through every time you punch in a different set of variables. So I think that's where we're headed in terms of decision support and, I guess, guideline management that John was talking about. In the future, this will be a lot more commonplace, to the point where I suppose we're going to think about almost self-driving cars, but it'll almost be like self-driving EDs, where clinicians still have to drive the decision-making process, but they're assisted greatly by the data analytics in the background. But for future directions, look, to move forward with data analytics and the whole sort of idea around decision support systems in ED, we really have to clean up the data set. And I think that obviously, conceptually, again, it's simple just to make them all ICD codes, but I know there's implications for EDIS systems across the state that use SNOMED, unfortunately. But we're pushing ahead and we're linking the data set to the admission patient data set. We now have vital signs in EMR, as you know, and e-meds now, and radiology reporting. So once we get the emergency data set right, I think it'll open up a whole new spectrum of data analytic capabilities in the future. And I think this is what our kids and your kids will be looking at. They won't be looking at logistic regression or p-values or chi-squared values. They'll be running AI algorithms across the data to see what the predictors are. So with a little bit of strategic support from ACI, I think, and a bit of clean-up of the EDDC, this will sort of be a game changer, not just disposition, but also what the most appropriate clinical service is to admit them under, what consultations the patient require, what their length of stay is or need for ICU, or the risk of representation to ED. Those are all very computationally very simple parameters. It's just a matter of getting the data right so it's not rubbish in, rubbish out.